Hello, my friend. Welcome back to Leading Women in Tech. Today, I have a powerful conversation for you all about inclusion. Slightly longer than our normal conversations for guests on here. And I still felt like I only scratched the surface with the amazing Jacqui Barrett, who specializes now in helping organizations with their inclusion work, their understanding, helping the entire company understand what this conversation is all about. So I invited her on to start this conversation today. I think there are going to be more things in the future with Jacqui. We've already got a few ideas going on beyond just this podcast episode, because as you'll hear, we've really only scratched the surface. There's so much more to talk about. But just before I dive in and tell you a little bit about what we talked about, let me tell you a little bit more about Jacqui. Jacqui has a fascinating career. She obviously is now the owner or CEO of her company, Wider Thinking, which is all about helping companies to learn about EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion, education around that topic, making things more accessible in terms of understanding this topic, really scaling awareness of it, including allyship, intersectionality, belonging, our blind spots, common biases, and so much more. So that's where she is today. But how does she get there? And again, it's such an interesting journey. Jacqui lives in the UK alongside me, and she worked for BBC Television, working in commissioning, scheduling, even finance for three of our biggest TV channels, BBC One, Two, and Three. She was the right-hand person to the channel controller, which is a pretty big deal, and directly responsible for 1.5 billion spend, ensuring it was used to provide the right programs to deliver to the nation's homes, essentially. Kind of a big deal. But she had a long career break, 2 children. She mentioned that she had IVF challenges, something we didn't get a chance to dig into, which is a shame, actually, because I think it's something we need to be more open about on this show, because so many of us experience fertility issues, and that can be such a barrier in our careers, actually. But, had IVF challenges alongside caring for her mom, who had early onset Alzheimer's, and doing that across different cities. She mentions London and Leeds, and for those of you who don't know, they're 200 miles apart. That's like a complete guess. It's a good 4 or 5 hour drive, and a good 3 hours on the train, I think. With a young baby. When she returned to work, she realized her passion was this inclusion stuff, and bringing all her knowledge around how to run organizations well, all her knowledge from some of the stuff she'd done in terms of inclusion and awareness early on has culminated in her company today, Wider Thinking. And we touched on so many topics in this, from her making some movies early on in this work around financial inclusion, the lowlights in her career that kind of culminated in some of the successes she had, ultimately how she's ended up in a better place because of those. And also her passion for always fighting for the underdog. And the story that she has to share with you really highlights why we need to do this work, because her personal journey is personal, unique, as is every woman that comes on the show. And that's precisely why the work that somebody like Jacqui does is so important. So let's get her onto the show. Enjoy this conversation. This is definitely one I would love feedback on. Do you want more of this? This is such an important topic in my mind. It's something that we do need to be at least understanding and take ownership of as leaders. And I would love to know, where are you missing information on this? Do we want to go deeper? Do we want to go broader? What is it that you need to know around this topic? So reach out to me on LinkedIn. Give me some feedback. Would love to hear. Let's get Jacqui onto the show. Welcome to the show, Jacqui. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for asking me to come along, Toni. I'm really excited about the chat that we're going to have.
Yeah, when we first met, you reached out to me after I did a LinkedIn event, I think, and we had this amazing conversation. I was like, I wish that we'd hit record for that conversation. So I'm hoping we can duplicate that today. But let's start off with, how did you get to where you are today? Let's talk about your career, the highlights, those very important lowlights, and how you came to be so passionate about helping companies to be more inclusive.
Wow. Well, I mean, my career journey has been quite long and a real patchwork, and it definitely hasn't been linear. And there's been lots of jumping around, doing lots of different things. And I guess it started from being a kid and working in my parents' pub, which you were totally allowed to do in the 80s as a child. Uh, to then I was part of an opening crew at Disneyland in Paris, and I worked in as a PA in New York, and then I had 15 glorious years at the BBC. And then in more recent years, after I had children, I had a big career break. We can talk a little bit about that as well, perhaps. But after that, I then, when the kind of the fog was lifted, I co-founded a creative agency, and we made films around financial inclusion, female empowerment, sustainability, lots of stuff that I was really interested in, which then led to creating Wider Thinking, which is a whole e-learning program to help organizations scale awareness, real awareness and understanding around EDI. And some measurement is in there as well. So it's been a right old journey getting to where I am now, and I never would have predicted it. And but it's I think mostly it has been highlights, a lot of highlights, and when I think about, when you say about lowlights, I was trying to think about lowlights, and the one thing that really jumped out, which I guess we'll just really chew over, is I really remember not getting a promotion. It's quite a long time ago. I stepped up to do a senior role, and it was without any notice, and I did it very successfully for months until the new boss started, and he immediately gave the job to an old pal of his, a younger, inexperienced man. And we've heard it all before, haven't we? And not only that, but the boss also wanted me to go back to my original role, which was then reporting to this new guy. And he wanted me to do that so I could show him the ropes. And in other words, nurture his career. I would have to stand down and nurture his career. And I cannot tell you how upset I was.
Yeah.
As you can imagine. And I think, lots of us have had not dissimilar experiences of something like that.
Yeah.
So I think, that was a real low light, because this was my dream job. I'd been doing it. I'd been doing it for months. I'd been doing it well. I'd been exceeding all the KPIs. The work atmosphere was great. My team were great. I had one person in my team who said I was the best line manager that she'd ever had. I mean, this was my job. And it was robbed through blatant cronyism.
Yeah, I mean, I would go further and say discrimination at that point, but I suppose that's an interesting thing for us to dig into.
Yeah.
Was that discrimination or not? I mean, obviously we're talking, you and I are living and working in the UK, so we're talking discrimination in the UK sense. But actually, let's have that conversation.
Yeah,
was that just cronyism, as in he appointed a mate, or did it go further than that and it moved into the realm of discrimination?
I think it was cronyism. I really do think it was. And I'm not sure I didn't get the job because I'm a woman, or I don't think it was that. I think it was just he wanted his mate to have that job. And there is so much to unpack in that, isn't there?
There really is, yes.
I do think, would this happen now to me? I think, as I'm older and more educated and feel stronger and more confident to call things out, maybe not. I don't know. Would I have put more energy into fighting that decision? I think so, just as a kind of making the point of you just don't get away with it. So yeah, I mean, but ultimately what happened was I ended up in a much better place, which obviously is fabulous, but at the time I really didn't think it. But I did end up getting a better job, a bigger job, being much happier, and the road that took me just ended up working out just so brilliantly that I look back and thought, wow, this wouldn't have happened if I'd have got that job. But that's kind of beside the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
That is beside the point, and I know that I was just really upset and I just couldn't, and when people were saying there'll be other opportunities, I just couldn't see it. It was like, this was the job that I wanted. This is the job that I love. And the people who interviewed me said I absolutely smashed it. And then it just didn't happen.
Yeah, it's fascinating when that kind of thing happens, just from a purely like, I've seen so many of us, and I say us because I'm included in this, where something terrible potentially happens in the moment that feels horrifically painful. To have something like that taken away from you. But so much of the time I work with people and they're like, actually that was the catalyst for this next thing. I always say to people when I'm working with them, like, quite often this is the silver lining. It just doesn't look like it yet. It's the kick that you need to go and do that next thing. Because if that next thing was meant to be in that workplace, they would have supported you. The fact that they haven't is precisely why that workplace wasn't the place for you to grow. I would flip around and say, obviously you went off and got this dream big job. If you'd stayed, I think it's very easy to focus on what happened and it worked out okay. And yay, maybe it was a good thing I got out. If you'd stayed, it would have been because that would have been a dream big job. But because it was a different workplace and work environment where people were valued and nurtured for who they are rather than who they knew. And this comes into the inclusion work, which is why I'm bringing it up. Do you think that's part of what's going on here in this broader inclusion conversation? The nurturing workplaces become those dream places for us to grow and be accepted, irrespective of who we are and who we know.
Well, I think it makes a point of, if you don't nurture, and I've never really thought about it actually until we're just talking about this, but I'm using, when I think about that example, if you don't nurture and look after your people, they go. And that's exactly what I did. There was an expectation that I would take it on the chin, suck it up, stand down, go back to my old role, and nurture the career of this other person that got the job, which, quite frankly, I was never going to do. It was they were deluded to think that I would stick around and do that. But I'm a typical example of,
very much,
if you don't look after us, then we go, because there are other places, other teams where you are nurtured and taken care of. And that might be in the same organisation. It might be, it might be that you don't have to totally leave, throw the baby out with the bathwater. It could be that you go down the corridor and go to another department. It could be something, but you're going to lose that person if you don't make it a great place for them to feel valued.
Yeah, 100%. Well, okay. So I wanted to get into one more thing before we move on to what you do today, which is, you mentioned that when the fog lifted, and I'm assuming that fog, by the way, is around kids. Is that right? Like just the fog of kids, or was it something else?
Well, it was around being a carer, and what's really interesting as well is that it's that rounded that rounded person that I was back then. I was a carer of children and my mum. And I think it's something as well that we also forget about in the workplace, in that we assume that a carer is a mum with young kids, when actually it's so much bigger than that. So I was looking after my mum as well, who had Alzheimer's. She got Alzheimer's really young, in her late 50s, was diagnosed when she was 60, and she deteriorated pretty quickly. And I lived in London, and she lived in Leeds, and I was about to have a baby and then had a baby. And it was all through those kind of first few years of being a mum of babies, and babies through lots of IVF, so lots of stress. And and mum just getting sicker and sicker. And so me going up to Leeds all the time to at short notice and doing everything that I possibly could that was in my capacity. But whilst I was with a baby that didn't sleep, all
Yeah,
that,
it's crazy.
it was busy. Yeah.
Yeah, we might come back to that if we have time, because I think that's another conversation that I think so many people are going to resonate with. But I really want to get into the inclusion work. And the thing that really stood out to me there is you returned to work by going and doing various, I think you said movies, can't remember. But one of them was financial inclusion. So right there was an inclusion piece going on.
Yes.
Where did this passion for inclusion come from? When did it start?
God, you know what? I don't know. I've just always kind of like wanted to fight for the underdog. I think that's just always been in me. I've always had a passion about using your voice and helping other people to have their voices heard. So the film's about financial inclusion that we were making. It was actually for a fintech that were creating. They were creating a product to help people that didn't have bank accounts in quite a few African countries. So it was about, and how that limits people in terms of their accessibility to work. So you can't get a job in the factory because they don't pay cash, and you have to have a bank account, and just all where that takes you. And so that's what those films were about. And that just opened my mind to other aspects of inclusion. But in terms of my passion, I think I've just become more and more staunch about it as I've got older and lived a ragged life of patchwork of experiences. And so, I've just got more and more passionate about it and more educated about the lack of it. And for example, with my mum, we were talking about my mum, and I just some of the experiences there in terms of care and older people, or my mum wasn't even old, but people that are vulnerable, people who don't have a voice. And so there were quite a lot of experiences there that made me realize just how vulnerable people are when they don't have a voice.
Let's dig into inclusion for a second, because you've mentioned there people in Africa not being able to get bank accounts. You've mentioned all the people not having a voice. Obviously, I talk about women all day long, and from the inclusion aspect, we often think of inclusion around ethnicity and gender. I think a lot of the world stops at that point, right? We think of sexism and racism, and then we stop. Where you and I are already touching on subjects here which are way broader than that, like disability, country of residence, not just ethnicity. Tell me, in your mind, what is inclusion? What are we talking about?
Well, you've got to go back a few steps before you get to inclusion. So you've got to have equity, and also you've got to have equity before you have equality. So when we talk about the world of inclusion, I'm just going to kind of like zoom out a little bit before we focus on inclusion. But when you talk about inclusion, you've got to talk about it alongside equity and diversity. And a lot of people refer to it as equality, diversity, and inclusion. And I don't. I talk about equity. You've got to have equity. There's a big difference, and we can talk about that.
Yeah, definitely.
So when we talk about inclusion, that is about including everybody who is different, diverse. When we talk about diversity, we've got to really understand what diversity is, which is what we do at Wider Thinking. It's about educating everybody in an organisation to really understand what diversity is, because, as you say, many people think diversity is gender or ethnicity. And what we are forgetting about are the voices of people who are perhaps neurodiverse, have physical disabilities, from people with from a different socio-economic background, age. It's just so much broader and deeper than gender and ethnicity. And so that's what we do is make people kind of like just look around and realize, Oh, yes, of course. It's not enough just to have one woman in leadership or a black person on the board. That, what about people with disabilities? Why haven't we got any neurodiversity here? So it's really understanding what diversity is before you take the next steps towards inclusion. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge step. Well, you mentioned there something very profound, which I think most of us do not appreciate, which is there's a difference between equity and equality. Can you explain that one a little bit more for us?
Yes. Yeah, no, definitely. So, I mean, when we think of equality, it's very much about everything is the same. Everybody gets the same thing. And that's equality. And so, and there are some there's some great examples out there. For example, a coach has got a team of athletes. He gives everybody the same pair of trainers. That's equality. Equity is everybody gets a pair of trainers that fits them. So they're all trainers, but they're all different. Or there are other examples of everybody gets the same bicycle. Well, that's no good if I want a bicycle that's bigger, or if I want a bicycle that's smaller, or if I want a bicycle that carries a toddler, or if I want a tricycle, or if I'm somebody that can't use my legs, I want a bicycle where it's motored by my arms. And so equity is about giving me a bicycle that I need. It might be that I don't even want a bicycle. I want a scooter. So that's where, when we talk about equity and equality, so equality is everybody gets the same thing. Equity is where everybody gets what they need, and it's not necessarily the same as other people. And so when we talk about it in the workplace, that's where it's really crucial. In fact, I've got a really good example of equity and equality that I use a lot, and it's about toilets. And so it doesn't take me long to bring the conversation down to toilets. So if historically, when buildings were planned, there was equal floor space given to men's toilets and women's toilets. And I'm talking historically, and we know things have changed, gender neutral, accessible toilets, but I'm talking historically. Historically, it was the same floor space for both these toilets. And we all know what that meant, because we've all experienced those queues outside the women's toilets.
Yeah.
And less so. It's all about those massive queues outside women's toilets. And why is that? It's because it wasn't designed with equity in mind. And when we think about toilets, men's versus women's, men can have urinals, women need, there may be a couple of cubicles. Women, we all need cubicles. Therefore, there are fewer places, fewer spaces in that floor space for women. We need cubicles. We take longer because we have periods. We go to the toilet more often because we have weaker bladders from childbirth. Don't want to be too sweeping generalization, but when a baby needs changing, and I know the world is changing, but historically it was always women taking babies to the toilet.
That takes up a lot of space in historical ladies' bathrooms. Well, one is very uninclusive to the parent, like fathers.
Exactly.
But also it takes up like 2 cubicles.
Yeah, exactly. And so with our weaker bladders and therefore needing to visit the toilet more often, with us needing more time when we're in there because we've got a period, or we're changing nappies, maybe our own, or if we're a lot older, or not necessarily older, or if we're taking an older person, disproportionate. When we talk about older people, it was historically usually older women. There were more older women than older men, and older women take longer to go to the toilet. And so there are all this layer upon layer upon layer about how toilets don't work when it's equality, when it's equal. And so that's a really good analogy of explaining how equality doesn't work, and we should be looking at something with equity.
It's so funny you mentioned that. Like, I mean, it's such a good example, but I always used to say there are very few upsides of being the only woman in the room as a woman in tech. But one of the few is you go to a conference for tech, and there's no queue for the bathroom, the restroom, whatever you want to call it. We've got a lot of US listeners who, when we say toilet, they're like, "What?" But like there's no queue. And then it was when I started going to women in tech events and organizing my women in tech events, I'm like, oh my God, there's a real downside of us all being together. It's like there is a queue.
Yeah, and also, so at some events, what they do is transfer the men's toilets into women's toilets because
I've seen
of the
that.
abundance of women. So anyway, I'm just using that as an example, but actually what that translates to in the workplace is us really thinking about the fact that not everybody needs the same thing, that some people need more help than others just to get to the same place. And so equity in the workplace is really, really important. And that might be even at the interview stage, when we think, well, we give everybody the exact same interview, that's equality, when actually that doesn't work for a lot of people. And so we should be thinking about the interview stage and the interview process that helps everybody. And so it could be that an interview in front of a panel of 3 or 4 people might be fine for me, or doing certain tasks might be fine for me, but it might not be fine for somebody else that has physical disabilities or is neurodiverse. And so it's about thinking about how do we just make it a more equitable process. And then also, when we think about equity in the work, we should also think about flexible working, which I'm really passionate about. And when we talk about flexible working, it's not just working from home. That is flexible working, but there's so much more to flexible working than just working from home. It could be job shares. I mean, how many senior leaders do we really see in job shares? We should be seeing loads more people doing job shares. First of all, you're getting 2 brains for the power of 1, which ticks a lot of boxes when you're talking about diversity. But it could be job shares, it could be reduced hours, it could be reduced hours in school holidays. There's just so many ways around flexible working. And if you've got more flexible working options, then you're creating better equity in the workplace. It doesn't mean that everybody has to work from home. It's that, that's when you kind of do that one size fits all, that's equality. It's not about that. It's about making it equitable so that if people need or want or just work better in a different situation, allowing that to happen. And having flexible working really is a huge gateway to bringing in more diversity into your workplace. So it's something that organisations really should be pushing. It is an easy win to make your workplace more flexible. So yeah, equity is key. Equity is key.
You mentioned something really fascinating there that I'm going to take a moment to go into, which is flexible working and the ability to work from home. Like during COVID, all around the world, so many organizations figured out how to work from home. I've had so many conversations with managers over the last few years about how to manage teams remotely. Or like some people have really got it, others haven't. And now what I'm seeing in my work, at least in the tech industry, I'm seeing a polarization happening. I'm seeing companies that are like, hell yes, let's stay at home, even selling all their offices and all that kind of stuff. And I'm seeing other companies which have this complete tension. Senior leadership want a return to the office, or some powerful stakeholders want a return to the office. One of 2 things happens. Either it becomes a dictatorship, everybody returns to the office, or there's an acknowledgement of like, that isn't really viable. We will lose our best talent, but it tends to be, we'll lose our talent rather than actually having a conversation about, for example, I know I'm not productive in an office. I'm such an extreme introvert. It is completely exhausting. I can do a day and I will deliberately fill it with meetings, because if you actually ask me to do deep work in an office, I will do 0. I personally, you will not get your best out of me if I'm in an office. I work from home, have done for a number of years, well before I even started my business. Best thing ever. And so I kind of want to touch on this, both from the inclusion angle and also from like, my experience of like, I'm more productive. I've seen this with clients as well. I also have clients who really need to return to the office, something that emotionally I'm like, why? Because I'm such an introvert.
Yeah,
But I
yeah,
think there's a real need in them, which is the other side of it. But then the organizations and this inability in some of them to understand what their team needs. There's such a fear of our people aren't productive if I can't watch them from some people. There's this real fear of, if they're not there with me, how do I know they're working? I'm like, well, how do you know are you actually looking at their screen and watching them type? It's always my answer. But
yeah.
what would you say to all that? How does this all tie in with inclusion?
Well, if you're going to be really rigid in your approach, and I get, there are some jobs where you have to be present.
Yeah, some. Yeah, definitely.
But but in general, if you're going to be extremely rigid, and that's saying a lot about your culture, and that's saying a lot about, well, if you can't fit into this, then you're not welcome here. And I think we've all moved on from that now. And I think we've all got a little bit more aware of how it works. There isn't a one size fits all. And we've all got expectations now about being able to just do our job and be trusted and deliver. We did it, we have done it, and we can continue to do it. So it says a lot about that relationship between me and my leaders. So it makes me really sad when I hear that everybody is being forced back into the office, the classic Victorian style of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. It's like, really? Like, that was so last century. But when we realise that, and more people do realise that diversity of thought creates lots more innovation, productivity, creativity, loyalty. And the list goes on and on and on. I mean, all the stats, there, all the data is there. It's undeniable. And then if you're in an organization that's saying, no, you have to fit into this, then what you're saying is you're not welcome here if you can't. Yeah. And then what's that saying is that, is this really a place where you want to be? And I think a lot of people are voting with their feet. And we know that there's a talent pool resource issue out there. So if you want to attract key talent and not only attract them but retain them, then you've got to listen to your people and allow people to have some degrees of flexibility.
And that comes, you've like, one thing that we didn't go into here as we started was, why should companies care about this? Why should individuals and companies care about this?
Yeah,
I always take that for granted, but I've been doing this work for a long time. There's a reason why I work with women in tech. They're one part of the inclusion debate, but a very big part of it, 51% of the human race. But I get it. So if people are listening to this, why should they care about this?
Well, it has shifted, when we're saying about, how has it shifted over the years? Everybody has to up their game, and we can't go back to how it was. And we should care about this because we all want to thrive at work. We all want to I want to be my best self at work. I want my team to be their best selves at work. And if that means, and it shouldn't be a gendered issue. It shouldn't, I know a lot of this falls on women, and it's women that have started the whole conversation about part-time working and job shares because when we're returning back to work. But actually what this is doing is it's also freeing up everybody. For example, there's a guy that I read about that does condensed hours so he can have one day off a fortnight, and has trained to become a beekeeper. So it's just allowing everybody to have a much better fulfilled life. And whether that's about being able to go to the gym and then come into work a little bit later, it's just about helping everybody have a better quality of life. And therefore we should all care about it. And if you don't care about it, if you don't care about people, if you don't care about society, and all you care about is the bottom line, then look at your bottom line and look at how much you will be spending on recruitment, turnover, attrition,
Yes.
just all of that. If that's all you care about, then do it for that.
Yeah.
If you really don't care about people or society or the culture or anything.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I want to ask one more quick question. I could, there's so much we've just barely scratched the surface on here. But one question I know that comes up a lot just from the conversations I have, and I personally experienced this one as well, was we care about this. So many of us, we listen to podcasts like this because we care about equity, diversity, and inclusion. But it gets exhausting. We get exhausted being one of the marginalized groups as women. But even the male advocates, we have white men who are the least marginalized group, certainly in tech anyway. They are marginalized in other groups. I've never realized how marginalized men are in children's education until very recently. It's shocking. That's another thing for another day.
Yeah.
But, you know, it can be so exhausting doing this work. And it feels easy sometimes just to go, I'm done with it. I certainly, like, I got really burnt out being the voice that was always going on about we need to do this better. We need to do this better. This is why. This is how. What would you say to listeners who are feeling just exhausted? They want to continue fighting for others, but they're burnt out. What's your advice for them?
I've got lots of advice. But also one of the points I just wanted to pick up on is the fact that when we think about intersectionality and we think about it being a gendered problem or it's about women and I understand that this is about women in tech, but also
it's just the starting point. Women in tech is one tiny piece, I'm aware. Yeah,
exactly. Because when we look at intersectionality and we might think, oh, well, this isn't about being anti-men because there are men who are neurodiverse, who have disabilities, who are gay, who are just people that are just trying to fit in as well. So anyway, my advice around exhaustion, because yes, it is exhausting, isn't it? And first of all, when we're exhausted, we need to take a break and we need to take off our capes regularly so that we can breathe and recalibrate before we put our cape back on. But also we need to think about delegating and not doing all the heavy lifting. And so that's one of the things that wider thinking is really brilliant at, in that we scale awareness to everybody in an organization, so that everybody, not just senior leadership, so that everybody from the post person to the receptionist to the CEO, everybody really understands some of the things that I've talked about around diversity, equity. Everybody really understands what is allyship, what is intersectionality, what are the most common biases in the workplace. And this isn't just about unconscious bias training. This is so much bigger than that. Unconscious bias training is a tiny element in the whole topic in the whole world of equity, diversity and inclusion. Just talking about equity, people understanding what that concept is and kind of thinking, well, we do it all the same here. And so what I would say to people that are feeling a bit burnt out is, and I'm not saying this just to plug me, but anybody else that offers the service that we do, bring in, outsource it and delegate it so that everybody in your organization has a really high level understanding of what this is all about. And so that would be one of my first tips, like bring in the experts to help do some of that heavy lifting for you. And then, so that's sharing the load and delegating. And then allyship. Allyship is crucial. It's about finding the people around you that can help you as well. And understanding allyship in the workplace, which is something else that we also focus on. But I just think that's really important in finding your allies. Surround yourself by allies, and then also becoming an ally for other people. That's really important. And then also just finding your people, and it doesn't have to be in the workplace. It could be like I'm on about 3 amazing, massive WhatsApp groups that are around female founders. And we are women all over the world, and we are asking advice around more business things, but we're also supporting each other with a lot of the soft skills areas as well. And so find your people, whether it's networks, whether it's forums, whether it's your mentor, get a mentor, get two mentors if you can, get three mentors. But, you know, just all of that. It's around bulking yourself up with all these different avenues of where you can turn to for whatever that particular moment or that particular issue is that's burning you out.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I just, surrounding ourselves by our support network is so, so key. And although I'm a coach, I always say to people, you need mentors as well, especially the higher up you go in your organization. Your mentors are going to have less and less time. They're going to meet you once a quarter if you're lucky. But what you need is diversity of mentors. So they've got different experiences for you to tap into based on what you need. Don't have one. And don't expect a huge amount from each mentor. These people are busy. I am very careful about who I mentor. And when I do, I don't have much time. I'm a coach. I do mentor other female entrepreneurs but only in very small amounts because I have a business to run and I have done business coaching. And so the mentoring piece is like a gift back. So let's move on to Quickfire Round, because otherwise we will literally talk about this one all day. And I'm like, this is such a big, weighty topic. This kind of only scratches the surface. So I hope that we can continue this, Jacqui, in some way. I hope
so. We can have a part 2 another time.
Absolutely. Well, tell me, what is the worst piece of advice you've ever been given?
Oh my gosh, there's so much out there, isn't there? I think one thing that really stuck out for me was around that's not for people like us, or that's not for people like you. And when I hear that just drives me mad. But actually, I kind of flip it, and because that fires me up even more and makes me kind of drive on and pursue something even more. So even though it's like the worst advice, it's like, you don't know what that's done to me now, hearing that. But also, I do also think as well, when we're thinking about worst piece of advice, we should also think about the fact that sometimes it's about no advice. And I was reflecting on this. When I think about, as a younger adult, the lack of careers advice that was available to me, it was very much a kind of fumbling my own way out there, unless I wanted to become a teacher or a lawyer or a secretary, or just like something where there's like a specific path, which a lot of people don't have. And you're really lucky if you do have that kind of, that's exactly where I want to go and who I want to be. But for most of us, we don't really know. And I think it's the lack of advice, aside from bad advice, it's the silence that can be deafening in, especially when you're a young adult, just kind of hearing, just needing a little bit of guidance about where to go, what your options are, what to do there.
It's fascinating you say that, because I always think it's the combination of the silence plus then the very adamant advice. And there's nothing, advice should not be adamant. Advice should be like, have you considered this? And it's that flip-flopping between the two. And I'm like, very unhelpful before you learn how the world works, when you aren't learning how to assert yourself. When you start out in your career, there's so much to figure out. It's so lonely. Okay, I do like to always flip it around and ask, what is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Well, that's got to come back to my mum, because she would always say, go for it, girl. That was just one of her things. She had lots of little kind of, go for it, girl. That's what she would say to me. She would always say, think positive, and she would always say, go for it, girl. And so in many aspects, I've carried that in so many avenues of my life, giving it a shot. So I think that's a great piece of advice from my mum.
Oh, mums are the best, aren't they?
Yeah.
What is the last book you read, and would you recommend it?
Well, I just recently joined a book club, which is something that I've always dismissed. I've always thought, oh God, it feels a bit like homework. And I haven't got the time and blah, blah, blah. And so anyway, I got over myself and I've joined this lovely book group, book club, and I absolutely love it. And it just shows you, doesn't it, how you can have this set mindset of that's what that thing is, and therefore it's not for me. And now that I'm in it, it's just made me realize how much I enjoy books more. First of all, it's a great group of people, but secondly, it has broadened my reach in terms of what we're reading. And thirdly, I love the way that we dissect, and it makes me think about books totally differently from it just being a very solitary experience. So I would definitely recommend it. Anyway, the last book that we just read was Pachinko, which is by Min Jin Lee. And it's a series as well on Apple TV if people can't be bothered reading the book. But and I've done both, and both are great, and both are to be recommended. But the point that I am talking about this is, to my shame, I knew very little and still know very little about Korean history. So this book is the story of, it's a family saga, 4 generations of a family, Korean family, and it's about their history and relationship and culture, and it's fascinating, and it goes through political turmoil of Japanese colonization, the hardship of war times, and about seeking a new and better life in Japan. And and it's fiction, but it was definitely the reality for many Koreans. I would highly recommend it.
Oh, yeah, I'm definitely going to check that one out. Again, it's not the kind of thing I'd pick up myself.
Me
And
too.
that's the benefit of a book club. It's
Yeah.
fascinating. My team have just said that they want to create a book club, and I was like, oh, well, you can. Not sure I'm going to have time to join. Maybe I should.
That was me, like, for decades. Like,
Yeah.
no, I'm not bothered. Honestly, it just broadens your reading world so much. I would really recommend it.
Because we're always sharing book recommendations. I'm always sharing leadership book recommendations and the odd fiction pick. I do read a lot of fiction. But my team were like, oh my God, we've got so much to read. We should have a book club. I was like, I love the fact that I've created a company where they want to do that.
I think it's brilliant. And also, when you think about, like, if you've watched the joy of watching a great film or going to the theatre is talking about it afterwards with someone. And going,
yes.
oh, wasn't that great? Oh, I didn't like that. Oh, I was a bit disappointed. Wow, that surprised me. And then when we read a book, we kind of just internalize it.
Yeah.
And you know, when you meet somebody that's just read the book that you just absolutely have loved,
want to have a chat about.
Yes. So you get that in a book club.
Yeah.
So that's my top tip. Join a book club.
Yeah. Yeah. Like my husband and I do it accidentally in that, like, we'll pass the books to each other, or like, you have to listen to that on Audible or whatever. But then there's like a delay because there's only one copy.
Yeah, you've got to catch up.
Yeah.
So I haven't finished it yet. Have you got to? Oh, okay. No,
Yeah,
sorry.
I read a lot faster than my husband. So quite often, like, I'll be like, you have to read this book. And he gets like through them like 4 months later. And I've like read 10 others since then. Yeah. I get through a lot more books than he does. I just love reading.
You're going to love a book club.
Okay, mindset tip. I love to hear people's favorite mindset tip. It could be about leadership. It could be about being that inclusion advocate. What is your favorite mindset tip?
I think I've got so many, but I think one thing that kind of I say quite a lot and think quite a lot is, this soon shall pass. And I think it's a good mindset tip for good and bad. And because things keep changing, things keep evolving, whether we like it or not, they do.
Yeah.
And so it's been mindful that even the good times, we should just enjoy those little moments of joy, because it's not going to be forever. We should treasure it and relish it and embrace it and savor it, and just and don't take it for granted, because this soon shall pass and you'll be in another era and another chapter and things happen. And that's not to kind of put a Debbie Downer on something good. It's just about that, you know, this isn't going to be forever. And so just relish what this good time is. And if you're doing well at work, just savor it and And then also, obviously, when things are not so good, then I just think that can help you keep going, that there will be you'll soon be in a different place. So yeah, this soon shall pass.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Having it in the right space as well. This has been amazing, and there's so much value to the work you do. So how can people find out about you, what you do, connect with you, have a conversation? Where can they find you?
Well, so you can email me, Jacqui at Wider Thinking, and it's JACQUI. There's an I on it, so I think it might pop up on this screen without an I. But Jacqui at Wider Thinking. You can find the business at widerthinking.com, and you can get a contact through there, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Okay, we'll make sure all of those on the show notes. And yeah, like, so I don't think this ends up on our actual podcast. So for everybody like wondering what Jacqui's talking about, when we hit record, our names are on the screen. I don't think that ends up. I should double check that. I don't think that ends up on the actual video. So you're good, Jacqui. I know it's like you quickly type your name. It's like, I've written it wrong. But we'll get all of those details in the show notes. If you're listening and would like to connect with Jacqui, I highly recommend it. We have really only scratched the surface. This has been one of the longest episodes I've recorded. I was saying to Jacqui, like, well, 25 minutes in. And I try and keep them under 30 because a lot of people listen in the car. No, that's not happening today. This is a big, meaty topic, as you can probably tell, listeners. So please do reach out to Jacqui. If you know there's somewhere that work needs to be done, reach out to Jacqui. Jacqui, any final thoughts you'd like to leave our audience with today?
Keep failing.
Yes,
it means that you're giving it a go. Yeah. I just watched Nyad, and that is the film about a woman called Diana Nyad, and she swam, or did she, 103 miles from Cuba to Miami, and she kept failing. And it's Jodie Foster. It's a recent film. People might have heard about it, or anyway, watch it, because it's all about failing. And well, I mean, it's about the challenges and friendship and so much more. But the thing that I took away from it was just the fact that she kept failing, but my goodness, she kept on going. And so, yeah, my final thoughts are just keep failing.
Oh, that's a beautiful way. I always say, embrace failure. Failure is where the great things happen, in my opinion. So I love it. Yeah. Jacqui, thank you so incredibly much for spending time with me today, sharing your words with this audience. I really hope that people have listened to this and gone, okay, I need to go back to this, or I need to start considering this more. Inclusion is such an important conversation for the workplace. It's just important in society as well. Most of my listeners as women in tech have got a personal experience where they're impacted by this. It's so much bigger than that. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, Jacqui.
An absolute pleasure. I feel like we could have a whole series of chats the way that we have just kept talking and talking. But it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you, Toni.
Oh, absolutely. Well, listeners, as always, remember, reach out to Jacqui. But until next time, stay in your tech leadership game and follow your dreams, because the world really does need that uniqueness that you bring as a leading woman in tech.